Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's Ajyal Spotlight with Mark Mangini. Please note that this session will be held in English, but Arabic interpretation is available. Therefore, for our audience on Zoom, you can choose your preferred language by clicking on the interpretation icon on the bottom of your Zoom window and selecting either the English or Arabic channel. You will also get a chance to participate in a Q&A session, so please turn your cameras on and get your questions ready. If you are watching this on YouTube, the session is only available in English. And now, join me in welcoming your moderator, Ben Robinson, a producer at Doha Film Institute's Qatari Film Fund and the manager of DFI's internship program.
Am I on? Is it on? Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I couldn't see myself, so this is why there was a pause. Normally, I'm very professional. Anyway, welcome to the last day of the Ajyal Film Festival. I can't believe it's over, can you? I feel like David Letterman here. I have an audience for the first time. Give me a big cheer from the room. That's great. Now, without further ado, I'm very happy to welcome onto the stage our final spotlight guest of the week. Please give a huge Ajyal-sized round of applause to Mr. Mark Mangini. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. Thank you. Yes. I had a PCR yesterday, so I'm good.
So did I.
So anyway, I mean, this is fantastic. Before we start, a little bit of extra information about our wonderful guest here. Mark Mangini is an Academy Award-winning sound designer and musician with over 150 credits, movie credits, to his name. His filmography includes the astounding Blade Runner 2049, The Fifth Element, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and this year's science fiction masterpiece, Dune. I saw it twice.
You'll make me blush.
Mark has also worked on animated blockbusters such as The Lion King, which I know is very big in Qatar, Aladdin, and Beauty and the Beast. Drawing on over 4 decades of acoustic experience, we are very fortunate to have Mark as our guest today as we explore the world of sound design and how it plays an essential role in the movies we love. Let's welcome Mark again. Now, let's take a look at a quick video of some of Mark's work.
My name is Mark Mangini, and I'm a sound designer and supervising sound editor. I knew sound could tell my story, but nothing quite like this. Sound artists are storytellers.
Survive.
Drive!
I've played guitar all my life, and I continue to play guitar and write, and I've had songs published and songs in movies. Sound can be used as a very efficient storytelling tool. Sometimes you want to hear something rather than have somebody tell you about it. Part of the artifice of filmmaking is this suspension of disbelief. When you walk into a movie theater, you need to suspend disbelief. You know what you're about to see on the screen is not real, but the filmmaker's job is to convince you that it is.
Wow.
May I don't know if you're here, Fatma, but Fatma made this beautiful clip, and I wanted to thank her if she's in the room somewhere.
Yes, big round of applause for Fatma Al-Ramehi. And no, really, total goosebumps hearing those sounds. And so I wanted to start, especially because we have a lot of younger jurors from our Ajyal Film Festival here today and watching online, with some definitions, because in film we often hear about direction, cinematography, and music, but we don't always hear as much about the unsung hero of film, which is sound design, right? So I wonder if, for those who may not be as familiar with sound design, could you give us a description of your work and, you know, what that entails?
Right. So a sound designer is that individual working on a motion picture or a television, any narrative program, whose job it is to be responsible for everything that you hear other than the music. Now let me explain that. It may come as a surprise to some, certainly not some of the jurors who are experienced filmmakers, that what you see on the screen most often doesn't come with any sound whatsoever. As you have seen, the kinds of films that I work on are heavily visual effects driven, and visual effects are something that are constructed in a computer and have no inherent sound whatsoever. So my job as a sound designer is to work directly with the director, just as the cinematographer confers directly with the director to determine the look of a film. My job is to confer with the director and determine the sound of the film in all its component parts, except for the music, and that means the dialogue, the sound effects, the ambiences, the Foley, the miscellaneous sounds. Everything that you could or might want to hear is my job to record, create, edit, and mix. Did that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And you've spoken in previous interviews about achieving, over the course of your career, a deeper way of listening and hearing, which I'm quite intrigued about, because your ears are so finely attuned. What are you hearing that the rest of us are not hearing, and how do you translate that onto the screen to complement images so well?
It isn't so much what I'm hearing, because I don't have special ears, but I've trained my brain to dissect what I hear in a very methodical way that allows me to use that information and leverage it into the motion pictures that I work on. So, for example, if we stopped just for a beat, because this is what I meant by that, the way I listen, I could be in a situation like this and I would just stop and listen. All we really hear is some air conditioning sounds here, but there might be some very light muttering over there at the desk, which they shouldn't be doing. And there's probably a buzz from that light up here. And those are the kinds of sounds that are capturing my attention, because I know someday I'll have a scene like this. This isn't the most interesting scene in the world, dramatically speaking.
I'm doing my best here.
No, hold on. Let me start over again. Because I want to understand how the world sounds. And to me, when I hear the world, the real world, that is a composition. To me, everything that I hear has structure, tonality, and intent to it. And those are words, by the way, that music composers use. I hear rhythms in the way that air cycling pump is putting the air conditioning into this room. I hear tonality in what the motor is doing. And I deconstruct all of that in my head so that I have a real deep understanding of why things sound the way they sound, because very often that's my job in a movie, is to reintroduce a reality that doesn't exist. And it's quite complex to do that.
And then taking that and combining with the vision of the director. Let's take one example of George Miller, who you worked with on Mad Max Fury Road. And, you know, having studied his career, he is a very specific filmmaker. And as you've spoken about, you had to align your sound design to his directorial vision. So how did that work with someone like George Miller?
George is a brilliant filmmaker because he's really codified the process in ways that makes it easy to work with him. So, for example, on Mad Max Fury Road, he described to me what he called the pyramid of importance, and he drew it for me on a whiteboard when I arrived in Sydney to work on the film. And what that means is that in terms of sound, and in any given moment in what we're looking at, we should be focusing on one thing visually, but more importantly, one thing sonically, and the thing that we want to focus on sonically might not be what he wants you to see visually. And in that pyramid of importance, if it's a shot of Charlize Theron driving the war rig, it might be that all we want to hear in that shot is the sound of something metal on the dashboard rattling, because that changes our focus to a little piece of the story he wants to tell about the tribe that she's from. When we could also be hearing things like the engine growling and the tires spinning, or people shooting guns and throwing thunder sticks at them. It's all about selective focus, and that's a very, very important concept in sound, is selective focus.
And I think also aligned with that, he center framed the whole film. Is that correct? That he draws the eye just right into the middle of the screen. Does that speak to the same thing that you're talking about?
Exactly. Visually, he repoed, meaning repositioned. He shot in a much larger digital format so that he could move the frame around in that capture to point the audience where he wanted them most to be looking. Once he arrived at that, we then had a good understanding of, most of the time, what he wanted us to be hearing at that point.
On that note, let's take a look at an incredible montage that was edited together from Mad Max Fury Road, which I think will illuminate Mark's point.
Where are you now?
Here they come again, worming their way into the black matter of my brain.
Help us, Max. You promised to help us.
Wow.
That looks like so much work.
And you know, let's talk about the layers of sound. I did hear, I'm not sure if it's true or not, that some of the sequences from Mad Max, it was impossible to actually render them because there were so many tracks of audio. Is that true, that there's like hundreds of pieces of audio in some of those sequences?
This may shock you, but in some of those sequences, there were over 1,028 individual channels of audio to make the big chase sequence, the set piece at the end of the film, where they're trying to escape the war party, and they end up, and then Nux ends up flipping the war rig. But it took 1,028 channels of just sound effects alone. There was another 64 channels of dialogue tracks, sounds of ADR, production sound captured on set, and another 128 tracks of music from Tom Holkenborg.
Wow. Is that a world record? Is that like the most ever?
I couldn't speak to a world record because I don't know, but I would say it's at the outer edges of it because it was so much sound that we had to move to the biggest sound mixing studio we could find in the United States to accommodate all that amount of audio. And now, as you can imagine, with that many tracks of audio, the need to focus on what do we want to hear out of those 1,200 channels is quite important, hence George's pyramid of importance.
And, you know, before we talk about the actual recording of physical sounds, which I know that you're very deeply involved in, can you just, in a nutshell, describe the layering process as you have done? So how do you bring this in? You're using like Pro Tools software, I presume? Yeah. Can you briefly describe to our young jurors that process of kind of editing sounds together into a sequence?
Sure. So the first step in that process is to have what we call a spotting session with the director. We actually have to determine what it is that the director wants to hear before we set about finding ways to accomplish all of it. Now, once we have that understanding, we break it down into some fundamental food groups. There are sounds we don't have that we need to record. So, for example, I didn't have a dual V8 diesel-engined trailer truck, so we needed to record something new and fresh for that. That's something we would do anyway. We always want fresh ingredients. A good metaphor here, a good sound designer is like a great chef. A great chef would never put canned peas in a really fine dish. So too, good sound designers don't put canned sounds in films unless they absolutely must. So I would break down my task list into what don't I have, therefore I have to record it. What do I need that I don't have but can't record but need to make because it doesn't exist in reality? And that would be the real traditional design process. How do you make a sound that no one has ever heard before? And then the third category would be incidental and miscellaneous sounds like footsteps and rustling newspapers, something we call Foley, where sound artists are in a quiet studio, they watch the film projected, and they perform actions recorded while they do that in sync. So now I've got the three food groups, and I have to embark on a many months long process of achieving all of those sounds, then editing them. There's the capture creation, then editing in a digital audio workstation like Pro Tools, and we have to put them in perfect synchronization with the film, a film, mind you, that is constantly evolving. George, and any filmmaker, as I'm sure you know, will decide, that close-up is a little too long, I want it to be shorter. So we're always chasing the ever-evolving edit to keep those sounds in synchronization.
And taking like a couple of steps back in the process, which is something that I'm really interested in asking, is at what point do you get involved in the project? Because I don't know if many of you know, or some of you will know, that often the sound designer is marginalized into the final part of post-production. I know you've been an advocate, strong advocate for getting sound design involved at script level, at the beginning when the script is locked. Could you talk about that process? Because I think that's what marks you out as an exceptional sound designer.
Ben, I've been waiting for this moment all my life. To all of you this is my soapbox, at least in America. When you want to say something important, you get up on a soapbox. Sound is a narrative tool as important as camera, as important as screenwriting, as important as acting. And the sooner you bring on sound, the sooner you have an integrated and organic and symbiotic process that is the way cinema was designed in the first place. And so to answer your question directly, that's my soapbox speech, sorry.
Yes.
With progressive filmmakers like Denis Villeneuve and George Miller, that process begins as early as the script phase so that we can comment on how can sound tell a story beat better than maybe a camera angle or a line of dialogue. Sometimes sound can be so much more efficient in telling you something about where you are or how you feel than a long line of exposition. And this is where we can be exceptionally valuable and cost-effective.
Yes. And talking about Denis Villeneuve, obviously you're in the middle of a very productive working relationship, starting with Blade Runner 2049 and then into June, both of which I think set a new benchmark for sound and film. So can we talk about the team that you take with you? I know there's a gentleman by the name of Theo Green who's very important. And then we're going to show a clip from Blade Runner just to...
Theo has been my creative partner on Blade Runner 2049 and Dune, and will be my creative partner, or I'll be his creative partner on Dune Part 2. Start shooting in July of next year. I can now officially say that. And Theo and I work a lot in the way that writers work, because you've probably seen that very often the most successful screenplays come from pairs of writers. I don't know why there's something about the bouncing of ideas off of another human being in a closed room, and you're not leaving until you solve the dramatic problem. That's the way Theo and I work. And when Denis brings his film to us, we will often sit down and fight over what Theo did the shields, I did the ornithopters, Theo did the voice, I did the worms. We pick passion projects that we want to dig into because we feel an affinity. There's something in our brains that's saying, I think I know how to solve that problem. And Theo and I will embark on usually about a year-long process of recording, designing, and editing sound for Denis' movies.
Let's take a look at a clip from Blade Runner and then we'll analyze it. If anyone from the audience wants to ask a question about this, I'm very happy for you to do that. So let's take a look at this clip. Wow. Does anyone want to ask about this clip? If not, then I will go ahead. So basically what I'm very interested in, we've talked about the studio, layering the timeline. I'm very interested to hear about how you gather sound. And what are we looking at here in terms of layers in this clip?
There's the three fundamental layers that are in any motion picture soundtrack, that what we call the food groups. There are backgrounds or ambiances, the sounds of the environment that the scene takes place in. There's what we call the hard effects, the sounds of the ship crashing and rattling and the harpoons, the things that you see. I'll use a fancy cinema word, the diegetic things. Diegetic simply means sound that has a relationship to something you see on the screen. And then the third layer are the designed sounds, the sounds that don't actually exist in real life, that we use to tell another part of the story. The fun part about that is that you saw one of my solutions in the initial clip because you saw a tractor pushing a whole load of metal parts. That was a sound in my early spotting sessions that I did not have in my library, the sound of a ton of very heavy metal junk being shoved along a pathway. So we rented an old junkyard and we filled it with metal parts, auto parts, engines, scrap metal, and we had that tractor push it just as the spinner is doing it on screen, pushing it. It's just we're substituting one sound for another.
Yeah. And then, because we're limited on time, I want to, obviously, before I hand over to our lovely audience, talk about June. So Denis called you up and said, obviously I have to have you on this project. So you got the script very early on. What was your first reaction? Could you hear June when you were reading it, for example?
No. Dune was unusual because I had read the book as a kid and I had some preconceived notions about it, but because it is such a dense science fiction tome, my first reaction was panic.
Oh.
Literally looking up at the mountain and wondering, how am I going to do all of this? And how do I please an audience with oversized expectations for what they've heard in their mind's ear for 60 years?
Yes. Let's take a look at the second clip, the first clip, sorry, the behind-the-scenes clip from June, where we see Mark's team gathering sounds. And it has a couple of cuts to the actual film where these sounds fill in. So this is the behind-the-scenes clip, please. Oh no, this is the Blade Runner one. We'll let this play.
This was also for that spinner crashing. We just went to a junkyard and pulled a couple of cars down to get crashing noises. This is a lot of fun, by the way, getting out in the field. Those are good days.
So how many microphones would you have on that, and how many of your team are there on the ground?
There were 3 of us. There was one, Eric, with a boom pole miking from overhead. There was me. I'm shooting that video and holding a boom pole with a microphone on it as I'm shooting the video. And there's my friend Ezra just off camera to the left, pointing a stereo pair as the junk is coming towards him.
Right. And then skipping forward, please, to the June behind-the-scenes clip. So we'll skip out the trailer because we're short on time, and I want our audience to have as much time as possible. Let's look at how some of the sounds from June were made.
Yeah, you knew right away.
Amazing.
Breathe lightly, I think, through your mouth. Keep your mouth open.
So this is a favorite American cereal called Rice Krispies that we put on the desert sand to make spice. That was the sound of the spice. And this is for when Paul Atreides comes out of the ship for the first time when he lands on Arrakis.
Now, Denis is again, much like George Miller, is a very meticulous director. How did you rise to his kind of vision? Was there anything new that you had to do for this project?
There was. Denis' directive on this film was, because it was science fiction, he wanted it to feel grounded. He didn't want a Star Wars sounding universe. And I love Star Wars. That's an extraordinary achievement by the great Ben Burtt. But we didn't want that fantastical sound, the sound that sounds like things you've never seen before, never heard before. His directive was, make this sound like a documentary. Make it feel as though ornithopters are something you could believe, that grounded in acoustic recordings, and as if we had landed on Arrakis with a crew and a boom pole and a microphone, and those were the sounds that we captured in the process of doing that. So we eschewed just a fun fact, 3,200 individual sounds made from whole cloth, design sounds, 2 were made with a synthesizer or an electronic device.
Wow.
And this is science fiction.
That's fantastic. And it should also be mentioned that this was the second in a row project with Hans Zimmer, the composer, music composer. I've heard you talk about the marriage and synthesis of music and sound design to such an extent where we're not entirely sure where the music ends and the sound design begins and vice versa. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct, and it's an essential component to the way Denis wants to work. He used the term, he wanted to erase the boundaries or erase the borders. The reason for that is to get back to this idea of suspension of disbelief. There's a little critic in all of our heads watching a film that says, you don't even hear it sometimes, oh, that's a good music cue. That's an interesting sound effect. And if you're doing that, there's some part of you that isn't engaged in the narrative. If we can erase the boundaries, as we talked about, then all you're really experiencing is the sound of that world. So we call what we do world building with Hans. We start working together during production. He's writing temp music, we're designing temp sounds, and we're finding the edges and figuring out a way to blur them so that it's just one continuous ride through that sonic universe. So that you're not stopped by the mechanics of filmmaking.
Let's take some... Now it's your turn in the audience and at home. I want to hear your best questions for Mark. So let's take our first question. Yes, this lady here. Let's run a microphone over. Yes. And introduce yourself as well.
Hi, my name is Natalie Fanek. I would love to hear more about the post-recording or recording. How do you, for example, the Rice Krispies, how did you know to put Rice Krispies on the sand? How, like, is it just trial and error, or like you just past experiences, or I would love to know more about that. Thank you so much.
That's a great
Natalie.
question.
I've done this for 46 years, so a good part of it is having experimented and failed a number of times. I mean, I wear the scars of mistakes for my entire career, so Theo and I knew immediately because I had used Rice Krispies for a lot of sounds. For example, Rice Krispies are also great for ants. If you put Rice Krispies in milk and you put a mic over it, you can hear that crackling sound like a little tribe of ants. So if you experiment with real acoustic things, with real physical objects often enough, and that's been the story of my career, of finding things in the real world to substitute for objects in a make-believe world, you start to get some ideas of where to begin. Now, that made it look simple, but we might have gotten out there and tried the Rice Krispies and thought, no, maybe cornflakes would be a better cereal for that kind of sound. So one of the things that I tell young sound designers, the best thing you can do as a young sound designer is to start recording. You have to get out and start listening to the world, and then bring those sounds back into your studio and see how they translate when you stick them up against an image. And that's how you develop that we develop that sixth sense of, yep, we know Rice Krispies are gonna work, or we know moving junk in a junkyard is gonna work, because you've tried it and failed, or you've tried and succeeded and know how to now improve on that process.
Let's take another question from the auditorium. Yes, this lady here. In the front row, thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Fatima, I'm from the Philippines. But first and foremost, I just want to share that I actually wrote an essay about making waves, the art of cinematic sound.
I know it well.
And yeah, because I did write about when you talked about when stereo came to the music industry, you were like, why can't we make films in stereo? So the thing is, sound department remains underappreciated in the film industry, and it's quite sad, but it's one of the most important, if not the most important. So most film students, when they get into film school, they want to be a director, they want to be a cinematographer, but no one really says, I want to be a sound designer. So my question would be, how would you drive young filmmakers such as myself to delve into the sound department?
Well, one good way is to let everyone know that most of my work is done on my own. Like, I'm going to the desert, I'm going out to your desert to recapture the singing sand dunes because I want to use them in Dune Part 2. So part of the joy of doing what I do is I don't have to show up at set and deal with finicky actors who don't want to come out of their trailer or, any other creative who has a different idea than I do. I get to do a lot of what I do by myself and fulfill my own creative wishes, and it's deeply satisfying to be able to do that. And I think if you're a musician, you're already partway there. A lot of the successful people in sound design maybe started life as a pianist or a guitarist or a violinist, and though that tuned ear is a great way to give you a head start. But it's just a bundle of fun. When you get with a director like a Denis Villeneuve or George Miller, they give us months and we don't talk to them. They literally say, go and experiment, do crazy things, and come back with the crazy things and play them for me, and let's see what do we want to do with all of this. That to me is like, what could be more fun than that? Well, I know there's a lot, but...
Let's take a question from our online Zoom audience.
Hello, Mr. Ben. Hello, Mr. Mark. I'm very happy to meet you here. My name is Rabi'. I'm from Syria. My question is, you have been working in sound design for decades. So tell us about the development that you've noticed in sound design from your beginning to now. And is this development difficult for you or no?
I'm sorry, say the last part. What was the last question? It dropped out.
Is this development in sound design difficult for you or no?
No, I'll start with the second question first, and the answer is because sound has actually gained, even though we're not as respected as we'd like to be, it has gained a certain level of respect that it didn't have 40 or 50 years ago. When I started, we made sound on these mechanical devices called moviolas, and we were seen and thought of as technicians. In a sense, sound was almost like a bath at the lab that you put the film through. There aren't people involved, there isn't creativity involved. You put film in at one end, and out the other end comes something with sound on it. And that's very different today. So I think we've made some great strides in the respect that we have in the industry. We could go further. And as you know, when I started, Dolby Stereo had just been invented, and movies were still relatively low fidelity. But now we have Dolby Atmos and IMAX, and we have an environment and a format in which to show the fullest fidelity of sound in the same way that visuals can be presented. So I've seen nothing but progress, in fact, in the results that I can achieve with sound in the last 40 or 50 years. Did that answer your question?
Let's take another question from our Zoom audience. Let's take one more from our online jurors. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello. First of all, nice to meet you. It's a very interesting talk. I'm very amazed by what you have done. I have an interesting question because, like, I work behind the scenes, but I was never like in the sound thing. But I have seen behind the scenes, like on Instagram, and the way they record stuff, so weird sounds, especially horror films. So I want to ask you, what's the weirdest way you use to record something? Like the most interesting recordings. We want to hear about that. Thank you.
Well, you saw one of them for the thumper in Dune. We buried hydrophones, microphones that are designed to be used underwater. We buried them under the sand because it turns out that kind of sand is very resonant and could capture sound waves traveling hundreds of feet or meters. And that's an unusual way. For the worm, well, there's a worm in Dune, and so I'm sorry to spoil this.
It's a big worm.
Yeah, there's a very big worm. And as you can imagine, there are no worms in real life. So how do you make the sound of a giant worm breaching and opening up its maw? Well, I can't record a real one, so the next best way to do that is some real-world analog. So I took a small microphone and dropped it down my throat and went... That's how you make the sound of a giant worm inhaling.
Wow. That is dedication.
Make sure to clean this microphone.
I will take another question from the venue now. Yes, this gentleman there in the back, stand up and tell us your name as well.
Hello, my name is Abdurrahman Mahi. I'm from Egypt, and I am a better juror. I just watched recently Dune, and I feel like it was very beautiful how you used like sounds to immerse us in this fictional environment. So like my first question was going to be like, how did you research for something like this? Did you immerse yourself in nature, or did you resort to mostly making your own sounds? And I guess now we know more. So my further question, which is more of a like technical, I watched the film in Dolby Atmos, and there was a lot, like, as an electronics engineer, I understand that a lot of work goes into the design of the system. So did you design like the distance of the sound from the audience, and how is this process like, especially with creatures that don't even exist, right?
I'm not sure, is it a technical question about Dolby Atmos, or is it how we mix those sounds in the recording room?
Because also, like, because first, like, you would edit the sound in order for it to sound normal, like in stereo or something like this. But again, now you're in Atmos, there are distances to the sound as well. So that adds like a complexity layer. So do you like interfere with that part of the design? Because I found it very interesting.
I do. Theo and I both feel that we need to bring to the final mix something that's very representative of what we want it to sound like. So, for example, we went to the desert and I recorded 7-channel wind. I wanted authentic sounding sand and dust and wind, and we brought out multi-channel mic arrays and recorded that so that I could layer that into my edit session. When it comes to the mix, it is now panned around the room in Dolby Atmos, and you feel immersed. So to answer the first question, that is part of my job, I believe, is to create that immersion, because I haven't fully designed a sequence unless I have fully immersed the audience, because that is part of, immersion is part of the storytelling process. Sometimes you can record it, you can put out all those microphones, sometimes you have to create it. So for example, when that worm makes that sound, that was a mono mic. I can't get 2 microphones in there, there's just not enough room. So I had to take that sound using digital delays and reverbs and create the echoes that would come off the dunes in the desert to make it feel like it's in that actual environment. So that is work that I would also do, but then I hand that off to our re-recording mixers and they would finesse that, and maybe Mark had it in this speaker, but we like it better just up in this speaker.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Let's take another question from the audience. This lady here, yes.
So hello, my name is Reem and I'm from Qatar, and I just wanted to say your insight is incredible. The way your mind works is just amazing, especially because I haven't really thought about it. I was talking to my friend about sound and she was introducing me to some things. So this session has been amazing. You mentioned talking about some passion projects that you and Theo work on, like while you work on a project. I wanted to ask, like, what have been some of your favorite passion projects? What do you tend to have an affinity for? And alternatively, what sounds do you have challenged, like, are you challenged when you have to make them or bring them to life? Thank you.
I'll answer the second question first. The toughest thing for me, and my peers say the same thing, the toughest thing to make is creature voices. Anytime there's if it's a Godzilla or a giant worm or an alien from another planet, the hardest thing to do is to give them a voice of some kind, whether they need to speak or not, and have it be believable. Even harder, for example, on Dune, Theo and I not only had to create voices for the Sardaukar and the Harkonnens, but we also wrote their languages. Theo and I are both, I was a foreign language major at university before I dropped out because I realized film is what I love to do. So I got to combine that nascent talent along with my design skills to create, and in fact, I am the voice of all the Sardaukar in Dune, and Theo's the voice of all the Harkonnens. Creature voices are a particular challenge because it's a physical being that's in front of us, and we have an understanding, a subconscious understanding of what that should sound like, but because you're making these sounds out of things that maybe don't exist, it's hard to sell it to an audience. So I always get a great deal of anxiety when I have to do that. Now, your first question was passion projects. I'm a guitarist, so I still write, and I write songs for movies, and I just put a song in the next Star Trek Picard. So that's always fun to keep my music chops up, which keeps my ears tuned. Music, to me, music and sound effects are to me like notes in a score, except we get more than 12 notes to play with. So I feel sorry for composers.
Let's take another question from out there in Zoom land.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Mangini. I'm from France and Tunisia. So my question is, so I've never really focused on sound designing in movies. I was always focusing on acting and cinematographer and cinematography. And so I was wondering, is your job, do you learn things from your job? Because you've been in this industry for decades, and do you think you are still learning things every single day?
Certainly, thank you, Molka. That's a very good question. I'm always learning technical things because equipment is always changing, and I want my work to be as high fidelity as it can possibly be. So I must keep up with the newest microphones and digital recorders and mixing consoles. I have to be familiar with all the gear so that the creative work that I do is expressed in the best way possible. I think what I've learned most over my career is how to encourage my creative instincts, which is to say, I too, 45 years ago, thought I was a technician until I discovered that I was an artist. And the things that have improved my work have been studied. I have taken acting classes, I've taken improv comedy classes, I've taken cinematography classes, because when I learn how other artists achieve a storytelling beat with the tools they have, when I learn why a cinematographer uses a certain lens or a costumer uses a certain kind of fabric, that gives me a new idea about how to leverage that in what I do. So the things that I'm learning are now the more ephemeral aspects of storytelling. The things I'm learning more and more are what is the story the director's trying to tell, and how can I do it better for them with sound? That's the big learning process for me now.
We'll take another question from our Zoom jurors. Go ahead with our next question.
Hi, my name is Ghalib.
How do you do?
My question is, there's sometimes you work on science fiction or on sounds that creature that doesn't exist or machines that doesn't exist. How do you choose the best voice for the sound for them?
Well, the best way is to look for metaphors in the real world. If the creature has a certain look that might, because it looks like a hippopotamus or it looks like a cat of some kind, we might start with the sounds of lions and tigers or elephants. If there's a visual reference that ties it to something that we recognize, that has given us 50% of solving the problem, because subconsciously, if I decontextualize the recording of a real thing and place it over a non-real thing, a monster, very often all you will connect to is the subconscious clues in the sound that it's something you recognize. So that immediately legitimizes the sound for something that you've never seen before. When it comes to machines, I also do the same thing. So, for example, in that sequence where the spinner is plummeting to the earth, the first thing I thought of were the old, in America, the World War II movies where there's two planes, the dogfights, and two planes are shooting at each other, and one gets shot, and it plummets to the earth. And the old sound designers used to put this, that's a crappy old sound from 1940 that's in Blade Runner of a plane plummeting to the earth. It makes that whee, and you know it's going to crash and destroy itself. And I wanted that visual and oral association that if you'd seen those World War II movies, you're thinking, yep, he's going to crash and die.
We have time for one last question from the venue. So it's so difficult to pick. So I'm sorry if I disappoint anyone. We'll take this young lady here.
It's fine. Hello. Do I just? You're
Hi.
near me. It's fine. I'm Asid Ahmed. I'm Sudanese. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
Thank you for presenting as well. So you were talking about earlier. One of the skills that you developed was kind of like dissecting the sounds in a natural room. So right now the air conditioning and people muttering when they shouldn't be, and etc. And I wanted to ask you, in the world of where sounds aren't established already, so in science fiction, etc., what sound do you take the most pride in? And if you were to leave one sound behind, what would it be?
Ooh, those are great questions. The reason I talked about the dissection of sound is that I want to train myself, and I encourage you to do the same thing, to learn to do that, because that's how you start a scene in a space you've never seen or heard before, because once you develop the skill, you'll very much more quickly go to the components you need to assemble to create that scene. Now, the secret to success, as we pointed out with George Miller, is only use what you need to use. There should always be what I call an economy of effort. Sound design is not necessarily the addition of sound. Sound design isn't just the creation of new sounds. Sound design, first and foremost, is an aesthetic. Sound design should first and foremost be, what sound do we need or not need? Sound design is also subtractive as well as additive. So once you've gone through that process of assessing the components you think you need, now you have to ask yourself, do we need all of them? Do all of them tell the story, or do some of them subtract or distract from telling the story?
Now, before we go, we have a special message from two of our jurors. As you know, Ajyal Film Festival has many hundreds of young jurors who are on their film education journey with us. So I'd like to invite up to the stage Lafan Hassan and Philip Azar, please.
Hello, everyone.
Pleasure to meet you.
You too. Good afternoon. I am Philip Azar, from a juror in this festival from the Hilal section, and this is my friend Lafan Hassan from the Badr section. In this festival, we have seen a lot of spotlights and talks, and we are honored to be closing this festival with an exclusive talk with Mark Mangini. And on behalf of all jurors, we are honored to present to you this honorary award.
Big round of applause. So just before we go, do you have any final encouragement for our young filmmakers in Qatar, of which there are many? What should they do next to get into their sound recording career? Because we need more sound recordists in Qatar.
Well, I touched on the first, and that the best way to start is go buy for $100 US, you can buy I use a Zoom H1, $79 US, and I carry that with me everywhere. It goes on planes, it goes in my bag. So if I hear something, and this happens, you can ask my wife, if I hear something crazy, I want to be able to record it no matter where I am in the world. So you can start for as little as $100 and start recording everything. Record the toaster at home, record your espresso machine, record the funny sound your car makes. All of those are going to be interesting fodder for designed things in science fiction films later in your career. But you can't begin that process until you start recording. And before you know it, you'll have a bespoke library, meaning a custom. You're not using canned sound, you're using original sound. That's what this is all about. And then the second thing I would say is one of the skills that has served me the greatest in my entire career is learning to be honest about what I think and expressing that honesty and sharing that honesty with my filmmakers in a positive and effective way. The more you can be you, the more valuable you are to the filmmakers that you're going to work with. Because most people are more concerned with getting ahead, and they're not focusing on the creative educational process they need to do with themselves to discover the inner artist that's inside of everyone. And art is just like sports. You have to exercise it. You become great at art the more you work at it.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Ajyal Film Festival, Mark, it's been an absolute honor to speak with you today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
now we're going to take you to Katara Studios to meet the sound team.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Okay.